Welcome to the Bounce Ballerinas podcast, Dr. Naya. Like I just said, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I really appreciate across time zones making the time and effort to be here today with our listeners. Thank you so much.
It's a treat to be here. Thank you for having me.
I want to dive straight into it because I have quite a few questions. And as I was explaining to you, we are doing a season all about difficult, tricky conversations. And I think you are the perfect person to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the ballet world and making sure that we are more culturally diverse. And you have written a beautiful book called Skin Colored Points. Let's start with, was there a particular moment or experience that motivated this project?
Well, when I was in graduate school, I was doing research on a ballerina from the city I was in grad school, Philadelphia. There was a dance educator by the name of Marion Sujet, and she was the centerpiece of a doctoral student. So I was reading this dissertation from a previous student from my program. And it was just fascinating to me to learn about Marion Sujet. The student actually who was writing at the time was Melanie White Dixon, who I like, 30 years later, I walked into her position at Ohio State University. So like it's very full circle. And she did the afterword in my book as well. So in any case, Marion Sujet was a dance educator in the 1940s, and she ran some ballet clubs at different schools in the Philadelphia area, which was, of course, this is well before the civil rights movement, so there were definitely a lot of racial divides within the city. And Marion Sujet was a very fair-skinned woman, and she could pass for white. And she owned the first Black-owned business in downtown Philadelphia, and it was a dance school for Black girls. But people would lease her the property and not know that she was Black. And then they would see all these Black people and families coming into this space, and then she would lose her lease and move across town or move here or move there. And it became a very transient dance school, but bustling business and a great following. And some of her students, Joan Myers-Brown and Judith Jamison, went on to, helm major dance companies, Alvin Ailey with Judith Jamison and Philadelphia with Joan Myers-Brown. Um, but in any event, learning about her story, I started to do interviews of her students or other students or Black ballerinas, and I was really looking at colorism.
Mm,
But as I was interviewing ballerinas, I found that they didn't really want to talk about race so much and they had so many other stories. And so I started to get into the other stories. And then I started to open up the lens beyond African American ballerinas to Asian ballerinas and Latino ballerinas and curiosities about Native American ballerinas. So, but it started really as a research paper assignment in grad school.
oh, wow. Well, you do all that work at university that you may as well turn it into a book, hey?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's amazing. You've spent a lot of time, obviously, researching and speaking with women of color in ballet. What was, I guess, the most surprising or unexpected insight that I guess you personally gained from these conversations?
I think that it was more of affirmations around things that I already knew, or maybe I knew deep down that weren't at the top of mind. But I think I gained a more nuanced and complex understanding of race and how it operates. It truly operates differently with different people. And I think that's kind of one of the fascinating things about it. One dancer can talk about all of these issues and challenges related to race in ballet. And one could say, it's a nothing burger. It never impacted my life. And it's like, what? So, how can we have such different experiences? And there's lots of reasons that one can hypothesize as to why, but just the complexity of race to touch people so differently, to literally be the change agent and impetus that drives people in different directions, and then for other people, something that they don't even notice and don't key into. And still other people, I believe, the not noticing then becomes, is it because it's easier to accept if we're not clued into the challenges and the barriers? Um,
Mhm.
so it's interesting to just understand that better. And as a woman of color myself, I oftentimes need to be reminded that the way that I relate to and deal with is not how everyone else is dealing with and relating to. So the multiple perspectives also support me in understanding a wider narrative.
Yeah, definitely. Did the original research paper, before the book even came about, come from a particular moment or a particular pain point?
No, I was really interested in learning more about Marion Sujet, and
Yeah.
I did turn that first paper into an article about colorism. It's called Dancing in the Margins. But I just really got excited about oral history interviews and hearing stories and learning more about behind the scenes in the companies, um, and also learning more about the interview process and what it takes to be vulnerable from the interviewee. Like sometimes I would finish an interview and say, well, that didn't go well, or, but what was it that makes one interview better than another? Truly, I think that the one, well, I shouldn't say the best, but my favorite interview is the person I was closest to. And in hindsight, it makes me think that when you have cultivated a relationship with somebody, you can take them places and get them to say things they wouldn't otherwise. So that's
Definitely.
interesting. Yeah.
Well, my next question was, your book shares the personal stories of 13, yes, women in ballet. And I wanted to know if there were any common threads that kind of stood out throughout their journeys.
Most of them were brought to ballet by their mothers.
Ah, okay.
I,
Like
that was
most of us.
Yeah, I think that was the most common thread. It was mothers and big sisters were like, this is something I did with my sister. My mother brought me here. But I think the mothers were like a big part of that. And it kind of makes you think about, the legacy that we give and how we navigate space and how we direct our children's paths and, kind of peels away some of those layers. And then the other thing I would say that everybody talked about and had some story of affection about were their teachers.
Mm,
And I think that goes without saying that if you've been in dance for a long time, then you have some dance teacher that's has an endearment to your heart, likely. So
yeah, it's a very big focus of mine, and even just through the work that I do with Bounce Ballerinas, sometimes think ballet can get a little bit of a bad rap, or we have people come through the studio go, "Oh, she's been dying to do ballet, but not really sure. I had a bad experience as a child," and it's nice to hear that they all had a beautiful introduction, and their mothers were like, "Here we go, off to ballet," and it wasn't a negative thing. Like that's really lovely to hear. Mm. Um, so I wanted to talk about many dancers experience an implicit bias and color casting in ballet. I wanted to ask if you had any examples from the book that you could share with the listeners that highlight this particular issue.
yes. Well, now wondering if I should grab my copy, but just off the top of my head, this came up a lot with Christy Latham in her story. She's an Asian dancer. She retired recently, in part due to some color casting issues,
Mm,
but she mentioned a number of moments of color casting in her interview. And I think one of the most poignant ones was her ability to self-check her own implicit bias, that she herself would look around the studio and say to the tall blonde dancer, "Oh, she's probably going to make a good Aurora." Like what is,
Ah, yeah.
you know, you're trained in a certain space through a certain lens, and you've been taught to identify people, places, things, and kind of trigger, oh, that belongs here, oh, this belongs there, and
Mm,
and even when you yourself are trying to shift who and who gets the part, it still is the case that that's all you've seen and know,
mm,
right? So her story has a number of examples. And then the other one I would say it kind of was exciting to engaged was Lauren Anderson. And Lauren Anderson is the first African American principal dancer in a mainstream company long before Misty Copeland. But oftentimes, because it doesn't have the qualifier of at American Ballet Theater, people kind of forget about Lauren or don't know or Lauren or whatever. But anyways, Lauren Anderson's interview was really fascinating on a number of levels. One being she will say, I never experienced racism. I didn't have any barriers. It was not a thing, which already has me scratching my head. Like, really? How's that possible?
yeah.
You're right. And so, if you dig deeper, there are nuances or moments that race does become a player in the story. But one of the kind of significant ones is around 13, she was pondering quitting ballet. Her parents had gone in and talked to the director of the school and company, Ben Stevenson, and asked if she had, what it takes to become a dancer because they were spending all this money on this thing and, was it really viable? And they said, well, no, probably not. She might could do musical theater. She's got a good voice, but, ballet will serve her. In performance, it give her foundation and technique, and you should keep her here.
Mm,
But upon hearing that, she was devastated and she thought maybe she wouldn't be continuing. And around that same time, the ballet school was posting for this spring recital performance production, and it was Alice in Wonderland. And all the kids run to the casting board and look at the list, and she doesn't see her name. And she looks and looks and looks, and she sees L. Anderson, but it says Alice. And so she says, well, that must be for somebody else because, of course I'm
yeah,
not
I
going to be
couldn't possibly be Alice. Yeah, yeah.
So she goes into the office of the director and she's in tears and she says, first you say I have no chance of, having a career and now I'm not cast in the spring. Like, what is going on? Everybody gets a part. And the director says, but Lauren, you're Alice. And she says, oh, Alice, I can't be Alice. Alice is white. And he said, the only color in art is on a canvas. You are a dancer and dancers dance and you are Alice. And she said, well, heck, if I could be Alice, I can be anything.
I
And so
love that.
and so when she shared that story with me, I said, well, the implicit bias in the story is her own. It's self-limiting beliefs. She had the implicit bias that she couldn't be
Mm,
Alice because she was Black, right? And so implicit bias isn't always about who else around you is looking at you in a kind of way. It's also the stories that we tell ourselves. I can't do this because I'm short. I can't do this because I'm, a female or, Black or whatever. But the implicit bias that we hold ourselves to. And what was exciting about her story was then a person in leadership can make a decision to interrupt implicit bias.
mm,
How do you shift how a whole room, a whole community, and a whole city thinks about who belongs and who gets to do what part? How do you shift that? Right. And so that type of leadership and interrupting that implicit bias changes the whole ecosystem. And now people don't think it has to look one way. They're looking at everybody now as the possible Alice or the possible White Rabbit or whatever. And what's fascinating to me is years later I was doing a talk about my research to some college students somewhere. And I said, there's a scarcity of Black ballerinas, and so few have been a principal ballerina in these roles. And I had somebody in the front says, well, I don't know. what you're talking about, really, because I've seen Black ballerinas as principal my whole life long. And I said, "Are you from Houston?" And
Yes.
she said, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Well, that's a special."
You're
But
special.
yeah, you're special. But change the whole way everybody in that city relates to who gets to be the lead. Right.
Mm,
If we offer different models to people, then they have different ideas of what's possible. And so this person, had no idea that there were barriers for Black women in ballet because she's from a place that didn't hold them. So,
mm,
yeah.
yeah. I love that story. That is fabulous. And how amazing, because that story of being cast as Alice would have changed her whole outlook, her whole trajectory, her whole everything, and given her hope. And then other young dancers, because I do sometimes believe you can't be what you can't see. And so that's amazing that that director made that choice. But speaking of people in positions of power, so whether it's a director of a ballet company, whether it's a studio owner or a teacher or anybody who's making decisions, I take that really seriously. And we have at our studio made a really big point of any of our students of color, if they would like their point shoes or their ballet shoes to be a different color, we go out of our way to order them. We find the ribbons that match. My mum is my business partner and she takes care of all our uniforms at the studio. And she is on a mission when she is trying to match skin color to ballet shoes and tights and point shoes. It's probably a question that you can't answer, but I thought it would be important to bring up in this discussion. We find it difficult to actually source. So a ballet shoe company will be like, hey, we've got this range of colors, but it is so much easier to get a bulk of the ballet pink, and it is they make it so difficult to get the different shades of color shoes. I guess what I'm trying to say is it can be really frustrating to try and deal with these companies who don't realize that there is a demand and a market for it. And I think it's really important as studio owners and teachers that we start from that lower level ground up so that they're coming through companies and going, where are my shoes that match my skin tone? As it's just a normal, um, necessity. How, in your opinion, how do teachers and studio owners, I guess, play a role other than matching skin tone to something as simple as shoes and tights? Like, what other things can we do to dismantle these biases?
I mean, there's many things, and the tights and the shoes are one thing, but it also has to do with what's being modeled, what's being held as like the supreme status. Um, it's one thing to have everybody in pink tights, except for the Black girls can wear skin colored.
Mm,
Be very different to have everybody in skin colored tights, as opposed to still having some in pink. Now, there might be certain shows where you want to have some pink tights or pink
mm,
shoes or whatever, but sometimes it can feel like I'm picking the othering thing. And so I've
mm,
seen dancers pick pink tights just to be included in what everyone else is doing.
mm,
So, like the way in which it's framed matters. Who is the featured ballerina on the door and what color are her, tights and shoes. So it kind of depends um, if Black people in that area or studio space or community are already experiencing any kind of second class citizen status
mm,
can feel like, oh, you have to wear the brown shoe. It depends on if it's framed as like you get to wear the brown or like we're all wearing a shade of brown. Some people's brown is lighter, some is darker. Like, can we feature that chocolate ballerina and say, like, this is beautiful? before we shift someone's costume to being othered than the other students. It kind of really
Yes.
depends on the community, how many
Mm,
students are needing a different shoe color or othered by it, right? So I've taught at Ballet Ethnic Dance Studio where everybody is required to wear skin color tights, period, and shoes, and it must match. And they will help you dye your shoes, and they have, you can buy them there, and like it's all a thing. And then some places where I was working with a company last year, and in the dancer's contract, they're allowed to wear skin colored tights and shoes twice a year in two productions that they get to pick, which I thought was an interesting navigation of it. But everybody has a different way
mm,
of addressing the community that they're serving. So there's lots of variables involved. I think one of the things is that people need to think of any role as if it could be danced by anyone versus there's a type.
yeah.
And I think that includes a modeling of seeing many types of people doing many types of parts. So,
Definitely, definitely. We have, just as you were talking, I was thinking about we have a massive adult ballet community, and a lot of my students, I've found over the last couple of years, have really made an effort to, and it's as I don't even think about it now, which is fabulous. Everyone organically will choose shoes that kind of match their skin tone. I personally don't wear ballet pink shoes. Mine sort of match more of a flesh tone. And one of the reasons I did that was because I wanted to make my students feel, my younger students, feel like if they weren't wearing the ballet pink, that it was just normal.
yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of my boys will wear the flesh color as well. So it's good to know I'm on the right path. It can be really,
Yeah.
really tricky, but I am determined to make it very, just normal and like beautiful and everything that you said. Now, Dr. Nye, your book includes a historical overview of ballet in the US, but how does history, I guess, continue to shape this present day experience? And what I guess I'm asking is, what changes have you seen that excite you? And then do you think we're making real progress? That's a big question.
I do think that the progress is going in spirals a bit, so
Mm,
I think going forward and back and forward and back and forward and back, and we're looping around sometimes. It really depends. Leaderships shift, and sometimes we move back a little bit or stagnate a little bit and forward. And I think that we're all striving for a thing, and every shot at the target doesn't hit. And that's okay because we keep striving and we keep throwing out our darts, and that's great. I love the place that we've gotten to where we can see classical ballets and contemporary ballets. And I think both are so important to hold our history in those classical ballets and move us forward in the contemporary works as well. So it's exciting to see both and for sure.
okay. One of the concluding sections of your book, I did jump all over the place because I had a short time to read. um, it proposes a liberatory approach. What do you mean by that, and what does this look like in practice? I guess we've kind of touched on it, but I wanted it to be a full separate question.
I mean, I don't really know a lot about how ballet is experienced in your neck of the woods, but I would say that where in the States, for a lot of people, ballet is triggering because historically it has been a space of gatekeeping of who gets to dance and who doesn't. And there's been a lot in relationship to class, to body shape and size, to height, to skin color, to foot, like if your points and it doesn't, right? So lots of things that people don't have a lot of control over and feeling othered. And so, like, how do you interrupt that space and that idea of ballet and offer opportunities to enjoy the movement, the technique, and fly, or stretch, or, all of the things that we love to see and love to experience in the body when connecting to ballet? A lot of the things that I suggest are, pushing at traditions for sure. Like if it is traditional that the girls always have to do, you know, the Petit Allegro combination and the boys do the Grand Allegro combination, how do we change that? How do we have everybody doing all of the things? And maybe it's dancers choose if they want to go in the front where the music's slower or wait until the music speeds up and go in the back. And so, like, how much can students decide for themselves what they want to experience versus being told to get into this box or that box? And what
Mm,
happens? Everybody experiences the thing. And if we're not great at it, so what? We're still doing it and we'll do the other way too, you know? And we're just developing dancers who can do lots of things. So lots of different ideas are shared around opening up spaces that used to be kind of tight and controlled, but still providing structure and still providing guidance, of course.
mm. As you were talking, I was thinking about we personally teach Royal Academy a dance syllabus at our studio, and I have a few teachers say when they have a boy in the class, oh, it's so hard to get through the boy work and the boys' syllabus. And I say, teach it to the whole class. The girls should do it as well. And I remember as a young student, my ballet teacher used to teach everybody the male syllabus, and I loved it more than the girls' syllabus because I loved Allegro. So, yeah, it can bring, and I wouldn't have known that if my teacher hadn't have taught it to me, and I wouldn't have felt maybe as confident to jump in with the boys. So, yeah, no, I love that tip. That's really good. I wanted to
Another
know.
thing is our
Mm,
students, they might someday
mm,
teach and have a boy in the class or
yes,
students who want to jump or whatever the case may be. Or it might be, a young male student who might teach a class of young ladies, and so there's all those things to consider. Why not? And why not just have movement and the
exactly.
gender of movement? You know, I do think it's important that students know history, and some
Mm,
students really like to attach themselves to gender identity. But it's also, for me, I frame it as historically, this part is done by men, but we can all do it today, or historically, this part is done by women, so that they know and have an understanding of how the structure was, is, can be. But in this class and in this space, we're all going to do this together, or whatever it is.
I love that. That's a great point. What advice would you give? You can go as deep or as shallow in this question that however you would like, but what advice would you give to young dancers of color who are navigating ballet in the world today that might not be in Houston? Do you know what I mean? Who might not be somewhere where they, can see examples of themselves.
I would just say if you hear whispers that you don't belong where you are, listen to different people or turn up the music and, cast out any, doubting beliefs and ideas, really tune into what it is that you want to be doing and just strive for it and push for it. There's no one way to do anything. And so my way or, Lauren's way might not work for you, particularly because you might not be in a place where those opportunities come, right? But I would also say like, and then this isn't so much to the student, but to the teachers, like groom communities of support for all of the students. And think about that. I would say there's two moments that came up in the book, one really negative and terrible, and one really beautiful and affirming, but where it was really about peer influence. One of the experiences Christy Latham talked about was that as a college dance student at a university in the United States, and she's a part Korean woman, she would just be called Sushi, like that was her name. They only called her by that. Of course, this was out of the earshot of teachers, and that's the other thing. Teachers are not getting the whole story, right? So, like, you really have to have a sensitivity to how students who are othered in some way are experiencing this space. And then, total opposite, one of the dancers interviewed Crystal Perkins. She was an African American student in the South at the Augusta Ballet performing. And when students would say, like, who are those people in the audience yelling and screaming and cheering? And that was her family. And after she had already explained that's my family and they're really proud of me, it was not long before other people in the company would intervene when questions rose and say, "Oh, that's Crystal's family, and they're just really proud of her." And so, what does it mean for the community of people, for the other dance students to
Mm.
step forward to support, protect, and to love on community members so that all of the weight of explaining who you are and where you come from is not on that one student, but it's shared, and we can all learn about a different culture and community without having it be a moment of othering or shame.
Or the burden of just having to explain all the time yourself. Mm, that's a great example. I wanted to know, as a teacher, if you could change one thing about how ballet is taught in the classroom to younger students in relation to, I guess we kind of spoke about this with the Allegro, but what would it be? Have you got something in particular in mind that you would change about our current, the way that we teach ballet syllabi, a regular ballet class, a traditional ballet class?
I would just say, like, I mean, everybody is teaching from a very different context, but
Mm.
the vast majority of ballet students will take their ballet experiences in their hearts and carry them forward in their lives, and they will enrich their lives because of the relationships they've made, the ways that it puts their body in space, the ways that they're able to go and see performance and be audience members. But the vast majority of people who will take ballet class will not be professional ballet dancers. And so to put the weight and the exclusion and like the rigor of that on people who are just trying to find love in the world and be accepted as a young person, I think just that needs to be recalibrated sometimes.
I couldn't agree more. Final question, Dr. Naya. I always ask my guests what keeps you balanced. So what, you're a very busy lady. What keeps you balanced?
Well, I just think I tried to give a lot to different places. So, I'm at work, I'm at home, and I also definitely take time every day for myself to do something. Oftentimes it's a dance class or a pickleball game. Do you play pickleball?
Is Okay, is pickleball squash?
No. It's
No,
like a smaller version of tennis, but
paddle?
the court, yes, with a paddle.
Yeah, I think we call it paddle in Australia.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
it's called paddle. I'll probably have listeners be like, "No, Georgia, it's not called."
Well,
But I think it's
fastest
paddle.
growing sport in the US, so I don't know what's going on there, but we're playing it all the time. A lot because it's less space to cover. So if your knees are bad and you can't do tennis anymore, people switch over to pickleball.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure pickleball in Australia is called paddle. So,
Okay,
yeah, there
paddle.
you go. I
Use
love
paddle
it.
game. There you go.
I wonder why it's become, I was just talking to someone about this the other day. I wonder why it's become so popular. All of a sudden, everyone's
Yeah,
playing it. Yeah.
yeah, but it is. It's quite popular.
A
So,
friend of mine was playing paddle, oh, years ago, before everybody even knew what it was. And so I think he's now like, I don't really want to do it anymore because everyone's doing it.
yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been a really beautiful conversation. I really appreciate again your time. You're in Ohio, I'm in Australia, very different time zones, and I really appreciate it. I know that the Balanced Ballerinas community is really going to love and appreciate this conversation. So thank you so much. I'll be linking to your book. I found it on Amazon, and yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Naya.
Okay, well, thank you, Georgia. It's been wonderful to talk to you, and I'm happy that we were able to make this happen.
Me too.